live on YouTube. So I'm a former Michigander. I went to grad school at Michigan State and taught at Kalamazoo College for a couple of years, a long time ago. So it's 4:59 Eastern time. We'll give folks, I think, until like 5:03, and then we'll dig in with however many we have. We've got 18 registered, I think, 19 registered, something like that. So hopefully more than one shows up.
Need to step out for a minute. I'll be right back.
Okie doke. Trying to share the link for the agenda, but it's not letting me. The computer's being fussy. Message on sharing that says sharing is unavailable at this time. Let's see if clicking the button the second time will help. It did. There is the link to the agenda, and we will get started in a few minutes. And some people are coming in. Welcome one and all. We'll let some time for folks to filter in, just a couple of minutes, and we'll get started in like 5:03 Eastern time or something like that. We'll go ahead and screen share the agenda. You can think about that first question in the agenda. What strategies are working for you now? Give it one more minute-ish. Did you get a new dog, Ingrid?
No, I don't know. I don't know where that's coming from.
That might be me. I have 2 dogs downstairs. They're very hyper.
Oh.
Nice to hear from them. All right, well, why don't we get started? And we'll start with introductions. And when you introduce yourself, I'll ask that you share strategies that are working for you. And I've actually got some stuff in slides here. So let's actually start there. And the slides are linked from the agenda. And there's a nice black screen. So while it's loading, there we go. I'm Don Haas. I'm the Director of Teacher Programming at the Paleontological Research Institution. And PRI, the Paleontological Research Institution, is called PRI for short, because that's much less of a mouthful. And we are doing this workshop in partnership with the Geological Society of America for their annual conference, which formally started today. And we put together an agenda for the day, but I'm anticipating, especially since the group is pretty darn small, that will be conversational, and hopefully that'll work and people will engage in a friendly and collegial way in the discussion we're having today about climate emotions. So loosen up and be ready to talk a little bit. My fellow panelists are Ada Bastido at Amherst High School, and Nellie Duganhaus, who is also my daughter and is a freshman at SUNY Purchase. I, as I said, am Don Haas, the Director of Teacher Programming at PRI, and my colleague Ingrid Zabel is with us also. And one thing that works, that helps me sort of step back from my more negative emotions, is to get out into nature and to take a walk or a bike ride or a hike or something like that. And getting together with friends is also a very helpful thing. And I think I'll go to Nellie next for some thoughts and an introduction. So Nellie, you want to say who you are and what you do and how you manage your negative emotions, or words to that effect?
Yeah, so I'm Nellie Duganhaus. I'm a freshman at Purchase College, also SUNY Purchase. And I think one of the things that helps me the most is talking about these issues, talking about climate change, because for one thing, educating people is very important, but also just having that knowledge that like other people feel the same way that I do. Other people are also struggling, and other people also want to, take action and want to make change. That's empowering, and that, we need that to keep going and to know that we can do things, because it's not just, a few people versus, corporations or whatever. It's like there's a lot of people who feel this way. Yeah. That's really helpful.
And let's go to Ada next.
All right. Hi, my name's Ada Bastido. I'm a senior at Amherst High School. Something that helps me, I think, is also going for walks. I walk to school every day, so that really helps. My family loves going on hikes. And I think my environmental science class at school also helps in a way, because it helps. We get to have discussions in class and learn about these things. So it's good to know that there's other kids at my school who are interested in this and want to know more about it.
Great. And Ingrid?
Yeah, as Don mentioned, I work in climate change education at PRI. I think what helps me is doing that work. I feel like I'm contributing to helping solve the problem. And just work in general is a distraction from negative thoughts. If you're busy doing something, you don't have time to ruminate so much. And I think also looking at the actions of other people, like seeing again that a lot of people are trying to make a difference right now. That's helpful.
Yeah, and a theme here that I don't know if I mentioned myself, but working on the problem helps me deal with the problem. Did we lose some people? I thought we had more than two. Leah,
We
you
lost-
Yeah, I'm a junior at Grand Valley State University in Michigan. My professor's at the conference, so she invited us to come watch. And then I'm really trying to learn more about it myself. So my class with her, actually, it's a natural science class. And right now that's been really helpful because I feel like I've been getting real information and not anything from like the internet so much. So I'm kind of here to really observe and listen more because I feel like I personally don't know enough.
Yeah. Okay. And Samantha?
Yeah, I'm kind of the same as her. I'm a sophomore at Grand Valley State, and we probably have the same professor. She's at the conference, so I'm just here kind of to listen and to just understand like the impacts of it and everything.
Yeah, and I assume the professor is Caitlin Callahan, right? Yes, I know Caitlin. She has helped set up the set of workshops for GSA. Okay, let's flip back over to the slides and in the agenda, which Melly already said that. So, and I already said that, and Ada already said that. And you've all already heard that. Oops, I put in some pictures of stuff that I do. So hanging out with people I care about and getting out in nature and sitting by the fire and all of that is helpful. Those are me and my siblings earlier this summer. And the next piece is, where are we on climate emotions? What do we know about how these emotions are affecting people, and particularly students? And there's a link or two in the agenda to some information on this that confirms what I suspect you already know. People are stressed and anxious and depressed. And that's both a problem and an appropriate response. It is fully rational to be anxious about the state of the world if you understand the implications of climate change and where we are. If you try and make it all rosy, in my opinion, and there is research that backs this up, you're being deceptive, and that is ultimately not a good strategy. So I can talk in some more depth about this. There was one of the links in the lower part of the agenda where some resources are linked is to a recent study where they surveyed young people all over the world and found that yes, young people are anxious and depressed and have some other negative emotions associated with their feelings about climate change, which is exactly what you'd expect people to do if they understand the state of the situation. Many are also very motivated. And that is the appropriate side of the sort of scare response that comes from understanding this, is that you work on the problem. And when you work on the problem, you tend to feel better. And that applies to everybody down to, pre-K kids. If they work on a problem, they feel better about the problem. So a key effort in your work as educators should be figuring out how to engage young people in working on the problem, and not just young people, but your entire community. One of the things that gives me hope is that there are places around the country, including school districts that Ingrid and I have worked with, both the Buffalo School District and the Prince George's County School District in Maryland, are working with their county on their county action plan and their county climate action plans have roles for teachers and students. And both of those are new, and we're figuring out what that looks like. But that is a good reason for hope of connecting concerned people, students and teachers, with what's happening in their community to work on climate change. And there are lots of ways to make those connections. It's also very, very obviously true that the issue is politicized, and there's no avoiding that. One of the things that frustrates me is when people say that, well, this is political and we shouldn't talk about it in a science class. And it's like, well, politics should deal with what's important. Science should deal with what's important. Very, 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 very often, those are the same things. So you've got to figure out how to deal with what's important. And if you don't, then you're also being political, and trying to sort of cover it up is another aspect of the politicization of both climate change, well, not both, climate change and lots of other issues. So that's a very sort of brief set of ideas there. And one of the things, well, not one of the things, there's 3 recommendations in the agenda, which are also actually in a slideshow. But I would be delighted if people sort of walked away from this session recognizing the need for honesty, the need to engage learners in climate action, and the need to be out in nature. And that's actually kind of prettied up on the slide here. But thinking about what climate emotions are, Nellie and I mostly put the slide together yesterday, and then Nellie made it prettier today.
Yeah, and then it kind of, I didn't know about the transitions.
Yeah, okay. So all of these things are emotions associated with climate change, and there are surely others. One of the reasons for putting shame in the list is that a number of people who registered for this workshop today were from around the world. They're not actually here, but we had registrants from Bangladesh and Pakistan and the Philippines. And those folks are suffering from what Americans, not just, but Americans are historically more responsible for greenhouse gas emissions than anybody else on Earth, even though China is now emitting more than the US. When we add up the historic emissions, the US is by far the biggest emitter of carbon dioxide in history. And maybe China will pass us on that at some point, or some other nation will crank up the emissions. But right now, the US is far, far in the lead, even though for the last, I don't know, 5 years or so, China has emitted more than the US. When we take into account the 200 years of emissions that we've been doing from our industrial processes and driving around and all of that, we're the big winner, which is shameful. So shame is one of my emotions. And we have another participant has joined us. Hello, welcome. And let me repost the agenda in the chat here. Are there other climate emotions that come to anybody else's mind that, oops, what happened there? Didn't do that on purpose. Are there other climate emotions that come to mind for anybody else?
I mean, kind of similar to, shame. I also put guilt on there, pretty much the same thing. But the reason that I feel that a lot of the times is because I feel like there's in conversations about climate, we're kind of coming away from this in a lot of circles now, but there's been a lot of talk about like personal responsibility. And I think that one of the things that's good to talk about is, there's not really so much that we can do as individuals. It's tough, but that water bottle, that you use one time and then threw out is not the lead, problem here. And even thinking about the idea of a carbon footprint, that concept was created by BP. And I don't think a lot of people know that, but knowing that is weird and icky. For sure, icky feeling. And I think that it's gross to realize how these corporations are the ones trying to get us to feel guilty. And even when I, now that I know that I've been learning more about how it's, these bigger corporations and how we need to fix things through like policy instead of just personal responsibility. Still, I feel the guilt when I don't do certain things, I mean, here on campus, and we can talk about this more in a bit, talk about student things specifically, but like, I feel like my campus does not make it easy for students to be very sustainable and whatnot with like recycling and compost. And I feel guilty when I don't do a great job of that, but like, it's not really my fault. And it's not causing the biggest problems that we have related to climate. So I think it's good to realize that.
Yeah. And, individual actions are pretty limited, although there's still a place for them for sure, for a bunch of reasons. For one thing, taking individual action, I think helps you understand that that it's not all that hard to make certain changes. And therefore we should be able to do it at scale. And a favorite quote of mine is from Michael Fullen that change is technologically simple but socially complex. And if we could get everybody to stop using water bottles, the one-time use water bottles, that would make a very big difference. And behaviors are contagious. So, showing that you're making a change to the people you associate with helps it make it more likely that they will too. And I'll just turn my computer around and note that this house over here, the one with the outhouse in front of it, they have solar panels on the back of their house. You can see that I've got big trees in front of my house for my southern exposure. So I would have to cut down those trees, and I'm not ready to do that. But that's one of now, I think, 5 or 6 houses in the sort of 2-block loop that is my neighborhood. And I'm pretty confident that some of my neighbors have done that because, in part, they've seen that others of my neighbors have done that. And so you can think about sort of strategic contagion and things going viral, like putting solar panels on your house if you can afford it, or like figuring out how to go from being a 2-car family to being a 1-car family if you live in a place where that's doable, and things like that. So there is a place for individual actions, but I think it's hugely important to recognize the stuff that Nellie was talking about, that much of that is really blame shifting from corporations to individuals, and done strategically over many, many years. And a great resource on that is The Merchants of Doubt, which is both a book and a documentary, and that can help you understand some of how climate change denial became so common in the US. Other thoughts on this slide before moving on?
I'll mention one emotion, which I think I've felt recently, which goes beyond hope, and I would say that's excitement.
Mm-hmm.
The specific example, I think, is as we're making this transition to electric vehicles,
Mm-hmm.
which I think is really happening now.
Yes.
It's not just something that we think might happen. It's really happening. And of course, there are problems with it. You know, there are environmental issues with electric cars too. But when I think about a big city like, let's say, Los Angeles, and thinking about that, the transition to electric cars and how much that's going to decrease all that pollution. I'm not talking about carbon pollution and climate change, but all the exhaust that creates smog and that exacerbates people's asthma, and just the health effects, or just the idea of seeing a city like Los Angeles with clear sky.
Mm-hmm.
That's not something I would have imagined that I'd see in my lifetime growing up. And I just think the health effects and the other good things, like it's really building a better world in many ways. And that is super exciting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and in the same vein, when I smell diesel fumes when I'm out and about, most of the time that's coming out of the tailpipe of a school bus, because of the area that I live in. There aren't a lot of diesel trucks going up and down my streets, but there are diesel school buses, and you get this whiff every time they go by, and you go, ugh. And you know, they outlawed in New York State a few years ago the idling of school buses, but now there's initiatives underway to electrify the school bus fleet in this country, and that has huge implications beyond climate of making children healthier and reducing the asthma issues. And I'll talk a little bit too about an initiative on the Cornell campus, and PRI is affiliated with Cornell, and we are the outreach partner for the deep geothermal heat project for Cornell, where this summer the university, with funding from the Department of Energy, drilled a 2-mile deep hole on the edge of the Cornell campus to investigate the feasibility of heating the campuses. I think there's about 268 buildings on campus or something like that. And heating those buildings right now accounts for more than 40% of Cornell's energy use. And they're currently heated by a combined heat and power plant, natural gas fired power plant that they also use to heat water that they circulate through the radiators in all the buildings on campus. So the plumbing is there for doing this work. You're doing the heating with, somebody needs to mute themselves there. But doing the heat, providing the hot water from a different source instead of heating it with natural gas, heating it with the Earth's heat. And down at the bottom of that 2-mile deep hole, it's 90 degrees Celsius or about 200 degrees Fahrenheit, which is plenty hot enough to heat the campus. The trick will be figuring out if we can drill a few pairs of holes and get the water to flow from one hole where we pump cold water down to the other hole where we can pump hot water back up to heat campus. And I think that 40% that Cornell is using, for 40% of the energy at Cornell is used for heating, is about in line with what we use for heat in the Northeast at least, and maybe in the entire country. So if we can figure out how to replace that heating system with, or the hot water for that heating system with heat that doesn't require burning stuff and producing emissions, that's really, really exciting. So excitement is another emotion we should have on the list. So Thanks, Ingrid. Other thoughts on climate emotions, the list? We're up to 6 participants now, I think, or 4 participants and four panelists. The big question for really why we're gathering today is to think about how can schools and teachers help students become more emotionally resilient in the face of climate change. And I think it's, again, important to process, to chew on the idea that that it's not appropriate to be hopeful all the time. And sometimes people need to learn about things that are sad and scary. And it actually scares me that there are a lot of people in this country who are opposed to having students learn about sad and scary things, including about, you know, our past history in various ways, and racism in this country, and a whole suite of things, and just trying to pretend that those things aren't real is deeply problematic in a lot of ways. So the first idea, key idea, is that climate change has to be honest, and we should engage students in solutions, and that reduces climate anxiety and other negative emotions. And place-based learning that brings students into nature reduces anxiety and should be part of everyone's climate education. And, you know, if we have to boil it down to 3 ideas, I think that's a pretty good set. But I'm curious if you've got other ideas, and I think there's another slide that's blank here for us to put stuff in, if we have other ideas on how to do that. And those are sort of general umbrella ideas, and we can get into some specifics if you want to share ideas. And maybe I'll actually stop screen sharing and ask you to volunteer some thoughts or questions related to what we can do.
I mean, I think that those are 3 good basic ideas, and there definitely are ways to get more specific beyond that. I think that in my experience as a student, I have definitely not gotten a lot of that, like, solution-based education. I mean, I haven't gotten a lot of climate education in general, which is a problem. So, you know, the first thing is teach it. I think that, you know, we talked in my earth science class a little bit about it, and, like, you know, greenhouse gases and whatever, but it was really a pretty small part of the course. And I remember we talked some about that, like, kind of personal responsibility sort of solutions, but, like, we were also, you know, 14 or whatever. So it was like, use less water in your showers with these specific shower heads and take shorter showers. And that was like what we learned.
Yeah.
And I think that now, as an adult, I'm like, that was not helpful. That was not very helpful, partially because I was already doing that, being in a household with you. But I don't think that we really talked about any sort of solutions beyond that. And I didn't really have a lot of climate education later on in high school. And so I don't know. I think that it's tough to, like, you have to take on the responsibility of educating yourself with those kinds of things sometimes. And there are so many other things that you have to educate yourself about that it can get, you know, overwhelming and hard to figure out, what's accurate. Like I think it was Leah was talking about how she appreciated her professor seeming to use, like good, accurate information and stuff instead of having to rely on the internet. And yeah, it's tough.
Yeah, and part of the reason that I asked Nellie and Ada to be part of the discussion today was to sort of testify to having a lousy climate education in their K-12 schooling. And I think that's exceedingly common. I mean, that is the rule, and places that actually engage in schools that actually engage in effective climate change education are pretty rare in the US and around the world, actually. I mean, Italy is the first country to require climate change education nationwide. The UN, I'm forgetting the name of the Kyoto protocols, does include requirements for climate change education, but that mostly has not happened. And there's some stuff from, do you want to comment on that, Marion?
Yeah, so the links that I put in the chat are a couple of things that have to do with anxiety in kids. There was a very large scale study done by Ellen Fields, who is a professor at Lakefields University in Canada, and she looks at climate anxiety in education, in particular with how teachers are trained to deal with it, and also the impact on young people. And there was a study done that's in the link there, in which most kids said that they felt climate anxiety and didn't feel that the governments were doing enough, and also felt adults had let them down. And then there's another resource there by Kinsey, and she does a lot on hope and the need to have hope, and so that it averts a sense of helplessness that otherwise people tend to have. Canada's the same way as the US in that respect. We are supposed to have environmental education pinned throughout the Ontario curriculum, but the government here hasn't done a fabulous job to ensure it actually happens.
Yeah.
And there is a lawsuit that I think 7 youth have taken against the provincial government. And they're saying that under the Declaration of the Rights of the Child, that their rights are being obstructed by the government's lack of action on climate change.
Yeah, and I'll note that in February of 2020, I went to an opening ceremony for an exciting initiative in Ontario, because I'm in Buffalo, so going to, it was at Mohawk University, or Mohawk College, which is only about 35 minutes from my house, even though it's in another country. And it was a really exciting initiative involving 10 universities. And I think essentially all of the school districts in Southern Ontario to use the school's physical plant, the building, the infrastructure for the school, as a place to learn about climate change and climate change solutions, and engaging both K-12 students and college students in working together to study how to reduce emissions for the school system by putting kids to work. And like I said, that was February of 2020. And then March of 2020 was March of 2020. And I've reached out to the person that connected me to that and said, just in the last month or so, and said, is there anything coming back from this? And he was like, not as far as I know. So the pandemic sort of waylaid that really exciting initiative, and I hope it comes back. But yeah, and thank you for those resources. There's this is this workshop is a second one on this same theme. We did one, I believe it was back in May, in partnership with the Climate Mental Health Network. And I think I put a link to that agenda somewhere in the agenda for today's session. And it has links to a fair number of resources, including folks from the Climate Mental Health Network. Down lower in the agenda are some of those, and opportunities for joining the Climate Change and Mental Health LinkedIn group, and some other potential resources, but maybe I actually didn't put in the link to that prior workshop. I did not, so I will add that, and I've actually got it open, so let me just put the link in the chat. That is here. So this one has had speakers who have produced some of the materials that we're talking about, and I'll screen share again and take a look at that agenda. And there's also a recording of that session that if you want to check it out. But you can see that we had a lot of folks from around the US who are directly working in climate and mental health issues, and including a report on climate and mental health among youth, and and much more there. So explore that. And let's go back to our agenda, which is this one. And I'll also note there is a session coming up run by the folks at Action for the Climate Emergency called Let's Talk About It. And there's a link to that. And there is a pair of sessions, repeat sessions, later this week on helping your students combat climate change despair on this Wednesday. And that is through the faculty collaborative of people in higher ed working on climate change issues. And if you want some resources for kids, All the Feeling Under the Sun was published by the American Psychological Association last year. And there's a book on how to keep your cool on a warming planet, Field Guide to Climate Anxiety. And the Climate Psychology Alliance has a handbook. So lots and lots of resources here. This is the study I mentioned earlier that from 2021 that had the findings you would more or less expect, that people are anxious about, young people are anxious around the world about climate change. And these are organizations with some more resources. So are there other thoughts on that big question of what can schools and teachers do to help students manage their climate emotions?
I wanted to share a little bit. I think at Amherst, I really haven't had a lot of education on climate change and things like that, with the exception of environmental science this year. Mm-hmm. And even that isn't that much. What we've talked about is only the big, bad things that are happening around the world. We haven't talked about any solutions. And I think that's really important. Like, it's obviously important to talk about the issues, but it's also important to talk about the solutions and to share those kinds of things with your students and discuss, because otherwise you're not going to get anything done, and those kids are going to be even more scared for their futures.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And there's really good news in the world, and that's worth noting too. And let me pull up another thing from yesterday's session. Screen share again. Here is US coal consumption, which is remarkable. Coal consumption peaked in either 2007 or 2008 at well over 1,000,000 short tons of coal used per year in the US. And in 2020, it dipped below 500,000, so considerably less than half of what it was at its peak 13 years earlier. It bumped up a little bit in 2021. It is most assuredly below, 2022 will most assuredly be below where 2020 was. And that is stunning, really, really good news. And I can put the link for, this will cooperate.
Yeah, and, as we're sharing links and whatnot, I'll remind people that you can save this chat for later if you don't want to, like, you know, see all the links now, but you want to look at them later and don't want to have to save them somewhere else.
Yeah, you
can just hit save chat.
Great. So I will click on the link to bring up the interactive version of this and put the link to that in the chat. And and as Ingrid mentioned earlier, electric vehicles are really becoming a thing in the US. I have one. And we're actually, another program that we're doing later this month is we'll be doing a panel of EV drivers for folks who are interested in getting an EV. And that's in our Science in the Virtual Pub program, the 4th Thursday of the month, whatever day that is. I'll put that link in the chat too. But here you can see our peak coal consumption was 2007 at 1.1 million thousand short tons, or 1.1 billion short tons. And in 2020, we were under 500,000. So that's a gigantic change in not very many years. Electric vehicles have seen a gigantic change in the last 2 years. 5% of the vehicles sold in the US in the last 12 months, more than 5% were electric vehicles. And you know, 2 years ago, it was less than 1%. So that is a gigantic change. And it's also, I think, really important to note that switching to electric vehicles is a step in the right direction. But really, while we're thinking about how to make vehicles more efficient and cleaner and so forth, we should also be thinking about how to have a transportation system better than cars, rather than just focusing on making better cars. We should be able to get around without owning personal vehicles, especially those of us who live in more urban areas. And our colleague Alex just signed on, and she has spent most of this year in Paris and can speak to life without a car in a way that we Americans cannot. Alex, do you want to say a few words about that, having just popped on?
Difficult. I'm in a car.
Alex is actually in Denver at the conference right now, so
Yeah. Well, I was just going to say, if you live in a city, often it's more trouble than it's worth to have a car. It's expensive. It's difficult. There's no place to park. And you can, if there's a good public transportation network, as there certainly is in Paris, there's very little need for a car at all. And if you do need one, you rent one and it's not that expensive.
Yep. Yeah, and it's really interesting too. I think about all of the great big pickup trucks that are so common in the US now and in Canada as well. Alex, you want to mute yourself?
Yeah, and I'm not going to talk again because I'm driving.
Okay. So I think of all of those huge pickup trucks that are so common and mostly just transporting people, and recognizing that you can rent a U-Haul pickup truck or a van for a day for like less than $50. And you're paying $500 a month for a car payment on those big fancy trucks that you're mostly just transporting people in. And if you just rented a U-Haul when you needed a U-Haul, you'd be saving a lot of money as well as a lot of carbon emissions if that got contagious in the same, if not owning trucks got contagious in the same way that owning those big trucks became contagious. That would be a step in the right direction for sure. Okay. So pointed to some of the resources. I want to now point to this at the very bottom of the agenda. It's also the last slide in the slide deck, I think, is this nice climate change action Venn diagram. And I think you could think about, and we'll talk about where, what brings you joy, what work needs doing, and what work are you good at, and think about where you can fit in to that Venn diagram for your climate action and where those circles intersect. And I should have put this into a Jamboard or something so that you could mark it up. But I think we can just kind of talk about it and think about how this works for you and how you might apply this to use in your classroom. And again, I think this works from ages K to gray, as they say. So you could think about how to do this in an elementary classroom as well as with whatever other group you might be working with. So, so what do you think? Can you see yourself in the center of that Venn diagram?
I mean, for me, one of the things that I think is something that I hope to be able to do more of is like working with people to actually change like policy and things like that. In my politics class, we were visited briefly by NIPERG, which I don't remember what it stands for, but
the New York Public Interest Research Group.
There you go. And a friend of mine, and we chatted some with the guy on campus here who's with them, and it was just nice to realize, like, we, as students, we do have power, and we can actually make change happen. There have been things on campus that students have been like, this is kind of a problem, let's change it, and they are successful, and that's exciting.
Mhm.
And I think that's one of the reasons that we need to talk about solutions, is not just to make ourselves feel a little, less fearful about the future, but also feel like if those people could make, that, if they could solve that specific problem, we can solve this specific problem, and we can, make progress. It's something that is possible. I think sometimes it feels impossible, and that's what's scary, but that's why we need to talk about the good things as well.
Right. Yeah, and I probably haven't said this enough today, but the most important thing that we can do right now about climate change is talk about it. And we need to do that because the talk can lead to the action. And right now, most people don't talk about climate change on a regular basis. And most of the people who do talk about climate change talk about it with people who already think like them. And so figuring out how to engage more people in more conversations about climate change, and having those discussions be with or include institutional leaders and municipal leaders and corporate leaders and such is just so hugely important. There's also an interesting study. I don't remember if I put it in the list of articles or not, but showing that young people are effective at educating their elders, and daughters are particularly effective at educating their fathers and grandfathers. And I think that's a very, very important idea, is engaging kids in becoming climate change communicators and educators. And I think, Nellie and Ada are both examples of that. Other thoughts on this Venn diagram or whatever else?
I was kind of going to go along with the point that you're making about educating our students. I'm going into, I think, K through second, so they're pretty young. So I think that's just extremely important to start the education younger, even if it's not quite as harsh in reality. But just giving them things they can do that aren't necessarily fake solutions. I don't know how to word that, kind of like how Nellie was talking about, like the shower head example. Maybe giving them more realistic ideas of things they can do to make changes at a young age.
Yeah, and again, the shower head does make a difference on the individual level, and I think that that there's good purpose for engaging in those individual changes. And another thing that you can engage the very young people in is planting trees, which makes a difference in lots of ways. It helps to sequester some carbon, but it also reduces urban heat islands, which, if you're not familiar with that term, it basically just means that urban places get hotter than rural places because of all that pavement and built environment stuff. Heats up more in the sun than a forest does, or a cropland or whatever. So putting more trees in everywhere, or not, I shouldn't say everywhere, because it may not be appropriate on a grassland to replace it with trees, but in lots and lots of places where people live, more trees will make a difference. And engaging kids in tree planting is a really nice thing to do, and you can keep track of how much carbon gets sequestered from doing that, and again work to make that contagious, so that other schools in your area are doing that, and families are doing that on their own time, and things like that are all I think good thoughts.
Yeah, and even just like making your class outside is nice. It's a nice thing that should happen more often.
That's right.
Yeah. I had another thought. This Venn diagram made me think of another resource that kind of comes at climate action in a different way, but it has sort of maybe different ways of coming to one action. And that's, and it makes me think of another climate emotion, which is frustration. I think sometimes people with frustration feel frustrated. I can't do enough. I can't do what I want to do. So this resource is from George Washington University. I'll put a link in the chat. It's called Realistic Ways You Can Fight Climate Change Today. And I think the emphasis on the word realistic is important. And if you go to it and scroll down, you'll see there's some sliders for money, time, and effort. So for instance, if you feel like you don't have a lot of money, you don't have a lot of time, you can't put in a lot of effort, you can move all those sliders to the left. Or if you feel like, well, I don't have money and I can't put in a lot of effort, but I can put in time, you can adjust them and then it'll filter out different solutions that you could try. And it's interesting. I think it's definitely geared towards adults or maybe older, high school students. I don't know. It'd be interesting to try if you put it to free. So, you can't contribute any money and then put to move some of the other sliders. Maybe there'd be some things that younger kids could participate in too. I bet there are.
Yeah.
It's worth looking at.
Right. And it reminds me too that we should, I'll add that link to the resources at the bottom of the document and add Project Drawdown as well, which is another great resource for looking at ways to draw down carbon from the atmosphere. Other thoughts on our Venn diagram here?
I just wanted to say, going off of what you said about frustration, I think I feel that a lot, because especially as a high school student, I'm not even 17 until next month. I can't vote. I can't contribute money to places. So it feels really hard for me because there's only so much I can do, and I can say, okay, I'm going to register to vote as soon as I'm 18 and all of these things, but there's only so much you can do, and I think you feel really frustrated by that. So it's really good to know that there are things that you can do without having to spend money or vote,
Yep. Yeah. And another great resource is the Wild Center in the Adirondacks has a Youth Climate Action Summit program that has run youth climate action summits all over the world. And those typically involve teams of students coming up with an action plan to do something in their school or in their community to reduce emissions or improve the environment in some way, shape, or form. And I will add a link to that as well. And I see Marion's comment about learning about the environment by going on walks and such is really, really important, because you can't love something if you don't have a connection to it. So getting out there in nature, I think, is just hugely important. And nature can be a city park if that's what you've got. For one thing, there's nature everywhere. And
Hey, Don.
Yeah.
I've stopped moving, so now I want to chime in on this discussion.
Great.
Going back to the thing about voting, and then also connecting that to what you were just saying, Don, about community organizing and actions at the local scale. A lot of communities do have climate action plans, and a lot of those communities, the plans in those communities were built in large part by input from youth. And so if you're 17, there's still a lot you can do, working with your local community, developing the climate action plan for the whole community, for your school, for the county. And with respect to voting, even though you can't vote, you can still work for a candidate. You can work for a progressive candidate. You can canvass, you can make phone calls, you can do text banks. And that's so important, because that's work that really needs to be done to elect progressive people who are going to actually help us make change and help us move forward, rather than be in the kind of roadblock place that we're in right now.
Yeah.
And then the last thing, I will just cheer for the trees, because planting trees is one of my favorite things to do. And you can do that with anybody at any age. So much fun.
Yeah, and in almost every environment that people live in too. And I'll note, I'll echo Alex's suggestion about working for candidates or campaigns, and note that Nellie did some of that when she was 15, 16, 17, something like that.
Yeah. I also like, Marianne mentioned when we were talking about planting trees that young students can also be involved in growing food.
Oh,
And
yeah.
I think that's also great, especially, at schools, if you've already had previous years of students planting trees and like there's only so much space to do that, often there's a courtyard where you can put in a little, community vegetable garden or something, and that can be really great.
Yeah, and just learning about the food system is really important for figuring out climate change solutions too. A really big issue is how much food we waste. And
Yes.
We waste about 40% of the food produced in this country. And that means emissions for everything along the production chain, from planting the seeds and harvesting and packaging and processing and shipping. All of that takes energy and produces emissions. And if we could go from 40% food waste to 10% food waste, holy cow, that would make a huge difference, as would changing diets to eat less meat, and or at least less carbon intensive meat, would all work towards that end. And again, thinking about the individual change that contributes to societal change, and recognizing that individual change by itself is something, but not enough.
But yeah, food waste is really bad, and that's another thing at schools that can be done, is maybe encouraging the district to like compost food scraps.
Yep.
I know that my school, like my college, there's a few different food places on campus, and like one of them compost, but I don't even know if that's the only place on campus where you can put your own like food scraps in, like it's just, there's like trash, compost, recycling. It's one place on campus for that. But I don't even know if they actually compost their own food scraps or just like the customers, leftovers.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure, because I think it's like, I think they have a little pile on campus somewhere. Like they're not selling their food scraps to a compost company or anything, but that is one thing that I wish my school did, was I wish that we composted on a larger scale. But that's also another educational opportunity for students about compost.
Yeah, and environmental racism and environmental justice are huge issues here too, that we haven't said out loud yet, but man, they're important. And it's also not true that people who are the victim of our environmental overshoot, or whatever label you want to use, don't care about the environment. That is just not true. There are studies that show that people who are on the receiving end of the frontline communities are deeply concerned and working on improving the situation writ large. One other piece that I put down below here is some thoughts on how to make good news, which I think, if we can think about past our history, maybe we can think about the events that we regard as encouraging and reverse engineer them. And that means, I think to do that, and this is a very, very unpolished document set of ideas, but I think if we can think about good things that have happened in the past and what went into making them happen, then maybe we can make some more good news in the world. So I came up with sort of a set of categories. So of kinds of good news. So we stopped something bad, we started something good, we discovered something, we achieved something, we made connections, we invented something cool and put it to use, and made something beautiful or fantastic, survived or averted disaster, explained a set of observations that helps us solve problems. So, you know, I think, again, I'll kind of throw this open for comments and invite you to suggest how we might make some good news going forward in the world. And I think, you know, I'm encouraged by the electric vehicle stuff we've talked about a little bit, and the deep geothermal heat project at Cornell, which I'll say a tiny bit more about. Is one of the ideas behind that project is that there is nothing special about the subsurface geology in Ithaca, New York. So it is hopeful that this project will work in Ithaca, and if it works there, it should work just about anywhere. And that has the potential to be some really good news if we can scale that up and eliminate the burning of fossil fuels to heat our homes and businesses and buildings and such. That's I am hopeful that good news will flow from that. So do you have ideas on how to make good news?
Can I offer something?
Absolutely.
Say the resurgence of Indigenous rights and knowledge is really important. In Canada, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, which is an ongoing work, painfully slow, is also a good thing. I think the resurgence of African nations asserting their independence throughout the diaspora is also a good thing. And I think, you know, as a white settler on Turtle Island, I think that, you know, breaking down kind of our white supremacy is hugely important. And also to climate change. I think that, you know, to a very large extent, capitalism and colonialism have really been the leading edge of causes. So I think reversing that is very deeply important.
Yeah, that's great. Other thoughts on how to make good news? And like I said, there's lots of, this is an unpolished thing. You can follow up with me and if you think this is a good idea and ways to do something more with it. And let's look back to the agenda. And I think I'm inclined to just leave it open for discussion and maybe stop screen sharing for at least a minute and see if there are other thoughts, other directions to go in what we've shared, and other resources that you all know about. Pull up the Wild Center's Youth Climate Action page.
What's the name of the lawsuit that's going on in the States? Julius versus, I think that's or Julia, something or other.
Yeah, I don't remember, but I know the one you're talking about with the young people.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah, I think that's excellent.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. We're a litigious society, and sometimes we can use that force for good. So I think
Yes.
suing the hell out of people can be a good thing to do.
From this side of the border, it does seem to be something that is enjoyed by those stateside.
Yeah.
I think Juliana, the United States, is what you're thinking of.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you.
Mhm.
I also came across another case, Sackett v. EPA, is an upcoming case. I have a court paper due in my AP government class. We have to research upcoming cases. I saw this one. It was about a couple in Idaho who wanted to build a house on a lot that they had purchased, but they couldn't because under the Clean Water Act, their house was on wetlands that were considered navigable waters. And so the EPA told them they couldn't build there. And I think that kind of case gives me hope that we're going to have more instances where more wetlands and more areas are going to start to be protected and preserved in the future.
I am nervous about what has happened to the courts in the US in the last several years, but hopefully they have not been totally neutralized, or whatever the right word is, but it is nerve making or something.
Yeah, there's a lot that's scary. Just the other day, my friend and I I don't even know how we started the conversation, but we somehow ended up talking about like politics and such. And we were like, we feel like we're in the part of the like dystopian movie that's like leading up to the apocalypse. Like we're in like in all sorts of ways, you know,
Yeah.
climate ways, just all sorts of ways. It feels very dystopian, which is very scary. But
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, but that, again, that fear can be useful. So if that fear leads to action, then that fear is useful and appropriate and a rational response to the world that we live in. And I think that's a really important thing to keep in mind, is that being scared makes sense, but you can't let the fear paralyze you and stop you from acting. So I think I'll look back to those recommendations at the top of the agenda, and I guess I'll share screen again to just so we're all on the same page, so to speak. And there we are. So be honest, engage in action, and love your place. And I think I think those three things, if we can infuse that into our education system, we'll make progress. And sometimes education works, and I think that it's been a good discussion, and I'm game to stick around for another little bit if folks want to continue on the conversation. And I welcome your input, and thank you for joining us today. What else do you want to talk about in our remaining 10 minutes? And it's okay if we end early.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's great that, you know, there are things like this where there, you know, people can talk about these issues, and like I was talking about at the beginning, it's just nice to know that other people feel the same way.
Right.
So
Yes.
I think, you know, one of the most important things, like you said earlier, one of the most important things that we can do for climate change is talk about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that also, I mean, maybe it should be stated more explicitly, but find a community to work with is important too. And thank you for being part of my community, all of you.
Have any of you heard of the book All We Can Save?
Yes.
So they often do book talk circles.
Yep.
And it's you know, anyone can go on to their site and find out, and then if they wish, start their own book circle. So that might be something to do, you know, within your university group of peers.
Yep.
For the
high school.
yeah, or high school.
Yeah.
And that's a good way to find.
I participated in one of those, and it was great. And I should add that to the list of resources.
Yeah, I'm doing one now with some people. All of them are from the US.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a different perspective. And there's also a Canadian organization called Common Earth, and it's fairly new. And they do again, kind of like what we're doing now.
Mm-hmm.
They have there's 2 modules. They're both 8 weeks, and they meet twice a week.
Mm-hmm.
And it's quite a lot of reading, particularly the second one, which gets into economics. And they use a lot of, it's a Canadian organization, but they use a lot of American modeling for economics. And some of the readings challenge the way economics are done. So that might be something that is, you know, worth looking into. Or Nellie and Ada, maybe in particular.
Yep.
But those groups will have participants who are from around the world. So the view that somebody in Nigeria has about climate change is hugely different than, you know, anything we can even dream of in North America.
Yeah. Yeah, and I just added All We Can Save to the list of books in the
yeah, I would recommend adding Common Earth as well. I think it's probably less well known, especially down there.
Yeah. Okay. It's named there for now. I'll try to remember to come back and put in a citation. Other closing thoughts? Well, thank you all for joining us today. And we do offer other programs. Let me actually pull up our Learning Earth newsletter that folks can subscribe to learn about other workshops that we do. Just a moment for that. Oh, and I'll also put in a link for a blog that we published earlier last month, I guess. So here's the blog, supporting climate change education because it works. And
do you also want to link Science in the Virtual Pub?
Yes, I do.
I think the link that you just put up is the same link that you put up before.
You are correct. Let me try that again. There we go. That's the right one. Put put up 2 other links, one for Science in the Virtual Pub, where we'll have our electric vehicle discussion shortly, and our newsletter link, where we announce the newsletter comes out 5 times a year, and we do workshops following each newsletter. So this is the one for our most recent issue, which I'm trying to get to, and my computer is being slow. And I'm reminded that I haven't actually put up the most recent issue in our archive of newsletters here, but you can find the newsletter there, and the subscription link, and for Science in the Virtual Pub, there's that link. That is here. And our How to Drive Electric session is Thursday, October 27th at 7 p.m. And those are all free and open to the public. And anything else that we should say before we wrap up? Doma wants to say hello. Oops.
I just wanted to say thank you. This was really cool to kind of sit back and observe and learn some new information. And I feel like some of my feelings have been validated, like just being anxious about some of this growing up.
Yeah.
So I really enjoyed this.
Thank you. Thank you. That's very good to hear. Yeah, and I can't say enough how important it is to validate the emotions and recognize that they're rational responses for the most part. I mean, if you completely shut down, that's not so good. But if you're deeply concerned and scared by what's going on, that means you're paying attention. So keep it up, and do things to make yourself not go crazy, but keep paying attention and keep working on the problem. That's our way out of this. And I think with that, I will say good night. And thank you all for joining us.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good night.